Great. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here. My name is Okwe Okwe, and I'm the founder of Necessidad Consulting. And joining me today is Neil.
Hiya, I'm Neil Pentland. I'm a program logistics lead for Mary's Meals. I've been working for Mary's Meals for 4.5 years, and I was a project manager for the project.
Great. So we'll be looking at how Mary's Meals is benefiting using Resco for Salesforce. Just to give a very brief overview of the agenda, we'll tell you about ourselves, the organization Necessidad, as well as Mary's Meals, and then we'll go through the challenges and the goals they had when they actually embarked on this process. We'll go through the journey where we started and where we are so far, and then we'll show you a brief demonstration of what the app looks like and the outcomes we achieved. So what do you think about when you hear the word 2020? Most of us would think, it's a great year, right? Some of us would think of COVID, some of us think of perfect eyesight or when we went last to the opticians. For me, 2020 is the year Necessidad formed strong partnerships. It's the year we had a partnership with Salesforce, Salesforce.com, and with Resco. We are a Salesforce and Resco implementation partner based in London, and our main mission is to strive to create a positive and significant impact in the organizations we work with by enabling them to transform and increase their capabilities using Salesforce and Resco. We are proud of the 4.9 CSAT scores we've got from our numerous projects so far, and it's tremendous testament to what we do. So what we'd like to show you next is a very short story about the shed that fed 2 million kids.
In 2002, I was involved in an emergency feeding program in Malawi, and when I was there, I had this encounter with a family. The mother of the family was dying, and she was surrounded by her 6 children. And I began talking to her oldest child. He was called Edward. When I asked Edward what his hopes were, what his ambitions were in life, he said to me, I would like enough food to eat, and I would like to be able to go to school one day. And that was it. That was all of his ambition at 14 years of age. And that answer that child gave me that day really sparked this mission, that recognition that millions of the world's poorest children are missing school because they're hungry, because they're working, that understanding that one meal every day for them in a place of education could change that, could break that cycle of poverty.
Over the last 4 years, Mary's Meals Kenya has been able to observe a tremendous growth in terms of the number of children we are reaching across Turkana. So in 2018, we started with 4,000 children across 36 nursery schools. To date, we are reaching to over 100,000 children across 701 schools. So there's that tremendous growth that we've been able to witness, and we hope to continue with this trajectory because there's need in Turkana.
So that was Magnus and our founder and CEO, and Amina, our country director in Kenya. So Mary's Meals is a simple idea that works. By providing a meal in a place of education, it encourages chronically poor children to come to school to get an education, which will be a route out of poverty. It's our vision that every child receives one daily meal in their place of education, and all those that have more than what they need share with those that lack even the most basic of things. So Mary's Meals, at present, we currently feed in 20 countries, predominantly in Africa, but we have also feeding in Asia, South America, and even the Caribbean and Haiti. We do that through the local communities. We provide food to the local communities which cook and serve the food in our schools. Where possible, the food is locally produced, helping support the local economy. It's a low-cost model. As you can see, it says there, €18.30 to feed a child for a full year, which is less than the cost of one Resco professional license. It's 93% of our donations is spent on charitable activities, which is very high for the sector. And at present, Mary's Meals is feeding over 2.2 million children every day in a place of education. So what impact does that have? Well, increases school enrollment. We've got evidence that proves it. Improves school attendance, and fewer children leave school early because of hunger. It improves concentration. Like, how many people in this room would be listening if they were thinking about their lunch? I'm guessing not very many of you. So this is a map of where we feed. So as you can see, it is predominantly in Africa. Our 4 biggest countries are Malawi and Zambia, share a border. Then in Kenya, here we go, and then in Liberia. These are the four, our 4 program affiliates, and they happen to be the 4 countries which we've so far introduced Resco to. In those 4 countries alone, we feed 1.6 million children, which is 73% of the children, and that's what we're reaching through Resco. In these countries, we tend to feed a meal that's suitable for that country. So in Malawi, Zambia, we feed like a corn soya-based porridge. In Liberia, we're feeding rice and beans. In Kenya, it's maize and beans. And each country is quite an interesting menu which we serve, which where possible is sourced locally. So Mary's Meals is quite a short history, 20 years, 20-year anniversary this year. So back in 2002, we started feeding 200 kids. That was in Malawi, which Magnus described. I was after that chance meeting with a child called Edward. And that has grown dramatically, almost like some of the graphs that we're seeing in the Resco presentation. It's growing and growing. And it finishes here in 2021. 2022, we're on 2.2. By the end of this year, we're hoping to be in 2.5. And by next year, 2023, we're aiming to be feeding 3 million children. And that is through having an application with like Resco, which has really provided that step change in improving the efficiency of our operations. So the challenges, I don't just mean OPE. Sorry, OPE was quite good, so I'll give him a break. So our previous ways of working, so it was, everyone was doing their own thing. Lots of pen and paper. It was taking an absolute age to get data from the field back to some form of office. The challenges, as I said, it was taking a lot of time. There's lots of data inconsistencies. So by introducing Resco, we've been able to add data validation rules, which is preventing the school feeding officers from collecting bad data in the field. So they're collecting good data in the field, which is being transmitted straight away to Salesforce. And we've standardized our ways of working, which has meant that we're able to grow much, much quicker. So the aim, to efficiently, effectively capture data offline, and this is the big selling point which we had for Resco. This is offline capability. Improving the quality of data through a fantastic app developed by OPE, and to make the analysis of data better, using dashboards, everything in one place for all 4 of our program countries. So what was the goals? Our goals are very closely aligned to the goals of the organization. What we are aiming to do is to keep the promise to the children which we're currently feeding, 2.2 million kids. But we wanted to do that more effectively, more efficiently, make sure that we don't miss any feeding days because of things that we do wrong, like deliveries are late to the schools, or the communities got mixed up and they didn't turn up to cook the food. So the goals are very closely aligned to that, but also to become more efficient so that we could reach more children quickly. So up on the board here, harmonized systems and processes. So all 4 program countries were using the same methods, improving reporting capabilities. All these things, as OPE will show you, we have achieved. So OPE will just carry on.
Great, thanks, Neil. So what I just want to show you now is a very short story of the journey, how we began and where we are so far. So Mary's Meals had Salesforce implemented, the core Salesforce implemented in 2018. And by the Q3, Q4 of 2019, they had a self-attempt to implement Resco. They came across a number of challenges and obstacles, and they needed a partner that shared the same values, but had the capability of implementing Salesforce as well as Resco for them. We had initial introductions in early 2020. We know what happened at that point. The whole world went crazy. We had COVID, there was a big gap. And by September that year, we signed an agreement to begin this project. And it actually began in October. So from October all the way till February, we configured the application. We went through the whole agile process to understand the user stories, to understand the backlog, get a minimum viable product we can ship out to the first country, which was going to be Kenya, which was the pilot country we started with. And by February and March, we had a go live, a successful go live. And following that, we added some new enhancements to make sure that we reflected the feedback we had from the people in the field, and then we rolled out to other countries. And that included Liberia, Zambia, and Malawi. So what we've actually done so far is every year we have 2 releases just to also make sure the product itself is getting all the using all the feedback we receive on the field and improve the capability within it. So building the app. What I'd like to show you next is the numbers, the considerations we had, and the short demonstration of what the actual app looks like. But let's start with the numbers. Just like Neil has mentioned before, there are 4 main countries, and in terms of the schools and warehouses, over 3,000. The users that actually use the application itself are about 332, and they've reached 1.7 million children with this application itself. It's also important, like we saw in the previous keynote, that it's important to think about the end users. Who are these people that are actually going to be taking this phone, the device, going to places in remote locations that have zero or very low internet penetration? These are the school feeding officers, and the feeding managers. They are the one who go to the school to see whether the school is actually following the processes, whether the children are actually being fed properly, what issues or challenges they're facing, what is the enrollment uptake, how many children are enrolled, and of those who are enrolled, how many actually attended, and all this information they try and capture digitally. So we have to put them at the very fore of our minds, what their requirements were, what actual processes were, as we're building this application. The next thing, which I'm sure most of you will be familiar with, is the Resco offline architecture. And what we just see here is the Salesforce, Salesforce, Resco Cloud, and the application itself. All our configurations on the server was done on Salesforce. Sticking to Salesforce best practices. We configured the project itself using Woodford, and the devices were able to download on the Samsung A21 mobile phones. And that enabled the synchronization of data to go back and forth between Salesforce and the mobile device. The key thing here was ability to capture data offline and get it back into Salesforce as quickly as possible. So we had a number of considerations we had to factor in, and at a high level, I'll just go through 3 of them. The first one are the requirements. The requirement was offline data capture. They had a number of complex requirements, which we had to have trade-offs between them and look at the implications. But also there was the ability that we wanted them to be able to, if they go into Salesforce or they go into Resco, whatever they're trying to achieve, they were able to do that on either platform. We also had to consider user experience because it was the most important thing. And there's, as some of you will be familiar with, core user experience principles, which are the visibility of the system status, the match between reality and the real world. We had to use terms where users felt it was representative of what they use daily, more colloquial terms to reflect the amounts, the units of measures, the items they were actually using. We gave them a degree of control and freedom on using the application, but also putting standards in place so that the validation and the integrity of the data was maintained. We had to focus on recognition rather than recall, and as well as affordance. So when you think of affordance, it's like you see a glass door, and there's a panel, and there's a handle. Instinctively, you just want to push the panel, and you want to pull the handle. The same concept applies to design. You want to make sure when people see buttons or when they see call to actions, they know what it means when they interact with it without having to ask or increase the training. It's just clear and intuitive. So all of these were part of our considerations. And then finally, we had the technical constraints. The license Mary's Meals had for Salesforce is known as a platform license. It's one of the many licenses Salesforce offers. And this in itself has some constraints where it only allows you to use up to 10 custom objects. So we had to design something that was within this parameter. And I think we only used 6. We still have 4 spare to use. So we designed a scalable solution within that parameter with opportunities to grow if more requirements came to place. At the same time when we were implementing this, there were other simultaneous projects happening. And it was important to have a clear, strong deployment and environment strategy. These are the sandboxes where we configure to avoid overlap and conflict. And also, this was a zero code. There was not a single line of code on Salesforce or Resco, not one. To achieve all of these things, we had to apply mechanisms that were on Salesforce and on Resco, and you'll be familiar with all of these things like the sync filters, the on-change rule, these loaded rules, and so I will go into more detail about this in the next slide. One of the most important things in any implementation is data quality. You have to trust the data you have. And these pillars, these 5 pillars of ensuring the data is accurate, ensuring the data is complete, and you can make meaningful inferences from them, something that is consistent, timeliness, and unique, no redundant or duplicate data. It was very important for us to do this so that users can actually trust the data. The monitoring and evaluation team could actually pull reports and dashboards that give them the true reflection of what was happening on the ground. And to achieve these, we used some of the things Again, we look at about Resco to validate. We looked at the load fetch, which is basically pulling records from the database on the device. And one of the key things we learned from this is before using anything from load fetch, you want to check if it does not contain data, not if it does contain data. And then we use the change items and the format string and Resco GUID ID. The interesting thing about the Resco GUID ID is if you're in a place where you've got a turbulent, significant interruption of network while you're syncing, this allows you to prevent synchronization duplications being created, because we wanted to make sure we had strong quality data and avoid duplicates or any sort of redundancies. So that's sort of a very brief overview about the data quality considerations we had. Other considerations we had was looking at the Woodford, and Woodford is a wonderful tool. There's so much you can do on Woodford, even without code. And for example, again, you'll be familiar with some of these things about the onload and unchange. And basically, onload allows you to specify rules that get executed when the app is open for the first time, the form opens for the first time. Whereas the unchange allows you to check that the rules are executed when a change happens, any change happens, or specify the change event in itself. Similarly, there was the unsave and the button click. These are quite clear. When a button is clicked, something should happen. When you save, something should happen. And then we had the unchange and changed item and the is loaded, and we had to use this judiciously based on the requirements we had to make sure that if a certain change happened, we wanted a certain event to happen in itself. When it came to data quality as well, we wanted to make sure that the right integrity of the data was there. So for example, our schools are configured using the accounts object in Salesforce, and there are other types of accounts. We don't want those other types of accounts to come into the device, so we use a sig filter to prevent that from happening. But also when you had lookup filters where you're trying to relate references to other objects, we wanted to make sure it was the right type of records that got pulled into those. And then we had the load fetch. Now, all of these things together were considerations of how was the best practice to put the right instructions in the right forms to get the best performance, robust usability experience. So this is a very short demo we're going to look at. It's probably 5 minutes or less. It doesn't tell you everything we've done, but hopefully it gives you an insight into what the application actually looks like.
This is a demonstration of the Resco for Salesforce application Necessidad as configured for Mary's Meals. The primary purpose of this application is to enable school feeding officers and school feeding managers to capture information about the school and the children that are fed in the school. When the school feeding officer goes into the app for the first time, they see this calendar, and this calendar shows them the various tasks and events that are scheduled to happen at various points in time. They can then go back to the home page where the school feeding officers, SFOs, can choose the schools that they've been assigned to. SFOs are assigned to schools. So for example, let's choose Turkana, Kenya. On this page, the number of actions that the SFO can take. They can take daily actions, stock-related actions, and monthly actions. They also have an array of related information they can view and also update. The daily actions, this includes checklists. And the purpose of this checklist is to guide the school feeding officers and managers on what they need to check to ensure that issues are flagged and followed up with tasks and events. So for example, when they click on the new checklist, they can see a number of fields they need to populate. The key one is the visit score, and this is an assessment of the degree to which the school is complying with the due procedure. So the school feeding officer can specify the date and the time they checked in, as well as the expected time to check out. Here they see a list of questions they have to respond to. So if they select all yes, assuming all the compliance were met, then we have a 100% score, as we can see here. And if it wasn't yes, we have a 91% score. Also, if additional checks were being completed, let's say, for example, food preparation and food serving, we then see that there are more questions that needs to be answered. The more questions that need to be answered, and the score reflects that additional question as well. And as they increase the numbers of compliance, the score is reflected accordingly. So let's go back to the homepage. I will not save this. We also have the feeding day, and this is to ensure that we collect enough data about how the children are being fed. When the SFO clicks on the new feeding day, they can capture information about the amount of items that were used for that feeding day. So we specify the date, and we can see different sections reflecting information about the food items being used for the schools. To minimize the number of clicks, we have a button here which they can click to apply the planned consumption amount. They can also, where less amount or more amount has been used, specify exactly what the amount was. And this text is a variance, and they must specify a variance reason. When the user then clicks on save, the record gets saved, and most of the fields become read-only. Also, child consumption records are created reflecting the values that were specified by the user. If we go back to the home page, we'll then look at the stock-related actions, which includes stock check, transfer it out, where food items can be transferred to other schools, as well as damages and stock loss. Below, we also have monthly actions. Monthly actions include enrollment as well as attendance. To ensure that there's up-to-date information about the school enrollment and the variances, the SFO can click on New Enrollment and specify the number of children per class in the school for that month. So for example, let's say we have just 20 people, 10 boys and 10 girls, we can see that the total and percentage reflection is automatically calculated. If I were to increase this to make it 30, you can see that value, 50%, 50%, and 30. Supposing this was 20, just one, a bit more, we can now see that it's 40 and the previous was 30, and we get the respective ratio. We also see the degree of change to see that there's been an increase in the number of enrolled students. So if I go back, the attendance is very similar to this. The main difference is that the SFO can then specify the enrollment record to relate this attendance with and indicate how many of the children enrolled actually attend. And based on that information, other similar calculations are applied. And down here, we can see the attendance rate as well as the previous total and the previous attendance rates. We also see the degree of change compared to the previous attendance and whether it was a decrease or an increase. So if we go back to the home page, there are other informations that the SFO can populate, but for the sake of time, I wouldn't show you all of these things. The key one being the asset. The asset shows you information about the items that have been consumed and that are remaining. So we can see the beans, maize, oil, and salt. And within here, we can see more information that includes the portion used for each child and the calculated amount of days of remaining stock, as well as the balance and the balance in the primary unit of measure and in kilograms. So the overall aim is to improve the program's delivery effectiveness and use all the available data we can collect on Resco offline to do so. The data is eventually synchronized back to Salesforce, where other processes and actions are taken, as well as reporting and analysis.
That's it.
Cool. So that was the app. A very short demo, but I'm sure you all agree. For a no-code app, that was very impressive. So very well done to Adobe for building that. So I'm just going to quickly take you through some of the reporting. So as we've mentioned before, we use Salesforce for our reporting. And this is just a very quick snapshot of one of the dashboards which we've created for our school feeding managers. So these are the guys that manage the field officers. So as you can see, I'll put a bit of red text in just in case you thought we'd lost a load of kids. They were still collecting the data, so the kids were going to come back. But yeah, this just gives us so much more visibility of the data than what we had before. And as you can see on the app, there's so many sums that's being calculated in the field that our school feeding officers would have spent a lot of time trying to capture. And things like there's a validation checks. It comes up with it comparing the enrollment versus the last. And if it says the enrollment's increased by 1,000%, then that's when our school feeding officers should be like, I think I've maybe put a wee typo in here. And as you can see, the visibility which we have here is so much better than what we have ever had before. And obviously then we're rolling that up. This is just Malawi. We have dashboards then which roll up all 4 program countries, so we can really start to see some trends. And this is just another dashboard to show some of the figures which we capture. So on Opie's presentation, you saw some things about the reasons for enrollment changes. So this is some of these reasons captured here in these little charts. And obviously with Salesforce, you have the ability to drill down and actually find any sort of anomalies. So if you're thinking death, for example, you want to find out where that's been an issue, you can just jump straight into that record. And just hand you back over to Ope to talk about the results.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to run through this very quickly because we're running out of time. So we had these initial goals to start with. We wanted to make sure we had a harmonized system where countries were using the same processes. We wanted to make sure they had a robust offline capability to capture this information. We wanted to make sure that all the processes that were followed were being correct and enforced. We wanted to scale efficiently and replicate the same thing in other countries, not just Kenya, but Malawi, Zambia, Liberia, and do this in an effective way. And also, like just Nila showed you, have information you can make meaningful decisions with on the reports. So we achieved all of these goals we set at the very beginning, which is quite tremendous. And in conclusion, what I'd like to say is we're proud, Necessidad is proud, that we've been part of this story with Mary's Meals. We've given them a robust solution that enables them to tell this story even further. And it's just been a great, tremendous success working with the team here that Neil represents. So what we'd like to say is thank you. Thank you to everyone for your attention. Thank you to the event organizers for this wonderful event, but also would like to say if you can kindly scan this barcode to donate to the cause of feeding children around the world, it would be greatly appreciated. Thanks. Question?
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Ope. It was a really impressive presentation and insightful, and I really like to see the application in action, so that was really nice. And let's have a look at the Slido application, if there are any questions. After you scanned it, of course. I'll scan it for my colleagues. And if we don't load the Slido application here, oh, we do. Okay, cool. We have one question from Nicole. Thank you, Nicole. So with the offline data, did you ever run into issues with a user using multiple devices? And if so, how did you handle this?
I've not really had that now. So because we are I'm not sure maybe what you're suggesting the problem might be, but our school feeding officers are all allocated to schools. So that only ever one school feeding officer visiting a school, aside from maybe their manager. So that we probably wouldn't have that issue. And sometimes that the users are syncing every couple of days because the connectivity in some of these regions is quite bad. But I don't think we've had any issues. Maybe you want to...
No, I don't think we have. Most of the people, when they go to the school, is one user at the school capturing all that information in one device.
Yep, cool. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Voice.
Any other questions? I can give you the microphone if there are any questions. Oh.
I submitted one, but I don't think it's refreshing.
Woo! Let's check. Our Slido master.
Yes.
Cool. It's there. Okay, thank you, Matthias. What has been the biggest challenges, pain points with the Resco platform?
That's a great question. I'm happy to be sort of very frank and open. I think there are different challenges from different stakeholders. So from a partner, the kind of challenges we faced will be slightly different to the kind of challenges they faced. So I can tell you one of the ones we faced, which I spoke to the team about yesterday, was when we encountered errors or things, it was quite hard to find which form, which rule this error came from, because you have to then spend hours to figure it out. Not even to figure it out, just know where to look, first of all. And we're happy to hear that they're trying to improve the log rules, because it's not as helpful as it could be. So personally, for me, that was one of the biggest challenges I had, which is what's gone wrong? How can I fix it? I think there was other challenges from a customer point of view. Don't know if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, and I suppose it's maybe not necessarily with the Resco platform, but from our point of view, like the guys in the field just crack on, like so they encounter problems and they're just like, oh well, that's just a problem. I'll just hit back and then or restart my phone, and sometimes just not reporting problems, and it's quite frustrating that they just sort of they have this mentality that I'll just get my job done and maybe it's not an issue and not report it. So that's kind of the biggest problems. And due to COVID, quite amazing actually. When we had the implementation plan, I was spending a lot of time traveling, but obviously COVID hit, so I didn't get to travel at all. So we implemented all this remotely. So it's a credit to the guys in the field that sort of we did all this through Teams and things. They got to do some training, but the training definitely wasn't as good as what it would have been had we been in person. And we've been able to see some of the challenges firsthand, because quite often the guys are just not reporting it at all.
Okay, any other questions? But I think we are over time, so thank you for answering those. Thank you, Ope. Thank you, Neil, once again.